This is the final module for the course. In this module, I'd just like to mention two other shell customization options that you have at your disposal. The first is called umask. A program called umask is used to specify the permissions that all files created by the shell should have. Before we can have a look at that, we've obviously got to recall how we create files using the shell. Can you remember that? And I'm not talking about Vi. How does the shell program create files? Well, we use the greater than sign. Can you remember? Let's have a look. I might simply type who greater than wholist, a list of users in my file called wholist. Let's do a little ls-l of wholist. I want you specifically to look at the permissions. They are rw-, r-r-. Now what are they numerically speaking? If I was to create those using chmod, that would be 644. Can you remember that? 6 for read-write, and 4 for read-only, and 4 for read-only. So 644. Now why is it that that is the default set of permissions? Obviously that's been specified somewhere. Let's see if we can't change that. The usage for umask is as follows. You type in umask followed by the permissions for the files that are going to be created later by the shell. Very interesting. You've got to be fully comfortable with this fact. The permissions that you specify are like those of chmod's numeric mode, in other words the 644, except that the permissions specify which permissions should be turned off, not which permissions it should be turned on, or which permissions should be set to, but actually which are turned off. Let's have a look at an example. Suppose you entered the command 022. Now what that means is that all files that you subsequently create will have permissions of 644. In other words, rw-, r-r-. Now how do you get 644 from 022? And the answer is you subtract them from 666. Why 666? Well, 666 is considered the full permissions, read-write for everybody. And note that the execute permission has got nothing to do with the umask program. You've actually got to completely ignore execute permission as far as umask is concerned. So if you take away all of the execute stuff, which would have been 777, then you're left with 666. Then with umask you specify which permissions should be turned off. So if you take those away, then you're left with the real permissions that all the files will actually have. I know it sounds weird, but you tend to only have to do this once. You do it and you put it in your .profile and then you forget about it. But let's just have a little go at it. Let's see if we can practice. What if I create a umask of, let's say, 444? That's a particularly weird one. You wouldn't do that very often, but I can do it. And then if I create another file, wholist2, let's say for example, then I do ls-l of wholist2, and I find that the 444 part has been turned off. In other words, all the r's have been turned off, leaving just the w's. So those permissions will be applied to every single file that I create from now on. I guess it's even possible to specify a umask like this, 606 for example, and then I'll create another file called wholist3 and do an L, or I'll just use a previous command line of 3, and then I can see that I've turned off both the permissions for the owner and both the permissions for others, and all I'm left with are the permissions for the group, which I haven't turned any of those off. So if you find yourself constantly doing a chmod to change the permissions on the files that you've just created, you might consider changing the default permissions using umask. The second part of this module is as follows. Suppose that you wanted to have a particular shell account exhibit the following behavior. The user logged in, then a particular program is automatically started. Maybe it's an accounts package, or maybe it's some third-party software like a database. Then, as soon as that program is finished by the user that's using it, then you immediately get sent back to a login prompt. In other words, the user that logs in with that particular account never ever ever sees the shell prompt. The program that they run is started automatically, and then when that program exits, they're back at a login prompt. Can you imagine why you might want such behavior? Perhaps it's the secretary. Now, I don't mean to belittle secretaries, but they probably don't have much knowledge of a Unix command line, and maybe all they ever do is work within the accounts package or the telephony system or whatever it is that they're using. Now, we don't even feel that they need to know the name of that telephony program or accounts package. That can be automatically started for them as soon as they log in, and whenever they exit that particular program, we will log them out automatically. I'm sure you can imagine how you might go about that. Obviously, we need to do some modification to the .profile, and we do. The following needs to be changed in the .profile. We need to add one line to the end which says exec space and then the name of the program that they wish to run. What will happen then is that as soon as the shell encounters that line in the .profile, the shell will say, aha, time for me to go. I'm going to now exit myself, and in place of me, I'm going to put this particular program. So at that point, the shell completely disappears, and the only program that's left running for that particular user is the program that you want to start. Now, obviously, the only way that you can ever then adjust the .profile to something else, maybe you want to turn that behavior off, is to log in using a different username, because the username that is in question here will be using an accounts package or something, and it's unlikely they'll be able to edit the .profile. So we'll need another user, perhaps the super user, or perhaps some other user who has permissions over that .profile to go and change it if necessary. I'm not going to demonstrate this to you because I actually don't have another username that I can use to log in with and change it back. Well, that's not true actually. I could set it up to exec a program like Vi, and in Vi I can actually create for myself a temporary shell, and in that temporary shell I can then go and modify the .profile and change it back. So yeah, why not? Let's have a go at that. So let's change my .profile now. I'm taking a bit of a risk, but I will do it. And right at the end, I'm going to change this line to be just Vi by itself. Actually, I neglected to put exec at the beginning. Okay, it's there now. So theoretically, the next time I log in, it should automatically put me in Vi, and as soon as I exit out of Vi, I should be logged out of the system. Let's try that. So we'll try that, mvirtue, and then my password, and I'm immediately in Vi. Now as soon as I exit Vi, notice that it is now not connected to zip anymore. It has been logged out. There are other ways of achieving the same goal, and that is you could, instead of putting the exec and then the program name at the end of the .profile, you could instead put the program name by itself without the exec, followed by an exit. What that does is it will start the program, but the shell itself that started the program will remain running, and then as soon as that program finishes, the shell will then exit. This particular method uses a little more memory because the shell remains in memory the whole time. Alternatively, you could actually make that particular program, the database program or the telephony program or whatever, you could make that your shell. Obviously you need to have the permission to do that, or you need to speak to the system administrator in order to do that. Remember this from the first module of this chapter, how to change your shell. Well, you don't have to change it, obviously, to the bash or the Bourne shell or the C shell or the Korn shell or whatever. You can actually change the shell to be any program that you like. And then as soon as you're logged in, that program will automatically be started for you. And as soon as that program finishes, then you'll be back at a login prompt, which, if you think about it, is exactly what happens when you start the shell. Now, with this particular method, you won't be able to do anything else in your .profile. You won't be able to set any shell variables, you won't be able to run any other commands. The only single program that will be running will be that program that you specify, which is perfectly fine if you don't actually need to specify any shell variables. or do anything else before that program starts.